for Education US. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started shortly here. Please do share a little bit about yourself in the chat box and share your name, your organizational affiliation, if applicable, and where you're joining from today. We would also love to hear if you have any announcements or information that you'd like to share. Here at the Global Campaign for Education US, we're a part of the global GCE movement, and it's a really exciting time of year. Not only is there so much advocacy happening on the human right to quality, inclusive education for all, but next month, April and May, we will, around the world in over 100 plus countries and all regions, be celebrating Global Action Week for Education. So we're really excited to have a chance to talk together about some ideas about that. Thanks to our wonderful graduate student fellow, Katie Loos, who will be leading us through that at the end of the meeting. So make sure you stay tuned. We're really thrilled that Rachel Smith and Ayman Qwaider from INEE, the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies, will kick us off and help to share not only the fantastic work that they're both doing at INEE, but also to really start the conversation around the important response that's happening and the relation to education and related areas in Syria and Turkey. We would love to hear from all of you and your partners. Similarly, we know that there's so much important work happening on education and human rights across the humanitarian development spectrum. And so we're thrilled that Giulia McPherson will be joining us to share more coming off of the Education Cannot Wait high-level financing conference. And we're delighted that Ann Hayes with the Inclusive Development Partners will be joining us specifically to share some of the exciting new work that they are bringing in. And then we're thrilled to hear from Lynda Eunice, with who's a leader in the UNESCO SDG 4 Youth Network. Sustainable Development Goal 4 focuses on education globally, and colleagues at UNESCO and around the world have been doing some very exciting work after the UN Transforming Education Summit and earlier youth and student engagement. So we're thrilled to have a chance to hear from all of these wonderful folks today. Like I said earlier, if you have any announcements, information you'd like to share, ideas and the like, please do flag those for us in the text box, both for this meeting and conversation today and for our monthly coalition meetings. And then we also are thrilled that our colleague Stephanie Pena is joining us, who leads our inclusive education and early childhood community of practice, which meets every other month. So we welcome your thoughts and ideas on all of these fronts for partnership building, advocacy together, ways that we can build stronger partnerships and impact on behalf of children and youth around the world and the human right to quality, inclusive education for all. So with that, if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself in the chat box, please do share your name, your organizational affiliation, if that's appropriate, and where you're coming in from today. And if there's anything that you would especially like to make sure to share with others. And we're just really thrilled that you could all join us today. I'm excited that we're going to kick off with our colleagues from INEE. You will, thanks to our wonderful colleague, Annie Lynn, who's organized this meeting. Huge round of applause for Annie and our wonderful student fellows for their fantastic leadership. We are sharing in the chat box more information as well about the full background of these fantastic speakers, the agenda for today, and the like. But if you have any questions or additional information that you'd like or resources to share, please do actively participate throughout the meeting. We will have here within Zoom a short survey at the end. We want to hear from everybody about your ideas and ways that you'd like to get involved. So with that, I'm really thrilled to not just welcome all of you, but welcome our fantastic colleagues who will be kicking off the conversation. Rachel Smith serves as the Psychosocial Support and Social and Emotional Learning Coordinator with the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies, otherwise known as INEE. And I know many of you are familiar with INEE. If not, we'll share more about that through this presentation. And we're really delighted that in addition to Rachel, Ayman Qwaider is joining us, who is the Arabic language community facilitator at INEE and just such a strong leader on so many aspects of disability inclusive education and education in emergencies. So thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the really warm welcome, and it's great to be part of this meeting today. Some of you will be very familiar with INEE, so apologies for this bit of an intro first of all. If we could go to the next slide, please. So INEE is the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, and as you can see from the slide, we're an open global network. And anyone can join. So I encourage anyone today who's not already a member to go to our website and sign up after this meeting. But we are a global network of stakeholders across the education and emergencies ecosystem. So that's everything from UN agencies, INGOs, NNGOs, CBOs, funders, governments, universities, teachers. And we come together through different network spaces and as a community as a whole to fulfill the mission of ensuring the right to quality, safe and relevant education for all those who live in emergency and crisis contexts through prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. And next slide, please. And we work towards this goal through a number of core functions. And so today, I'm not going to speak about everything that INEE does, but I want to speak a little bit about our resources, our tools and resources. And Ayman is also going to speak a little bit about the community building and amplifying and advocating that we do with our members. So in terms of community building, we build ties amongst our members in a number of different ways. I'm going to speak a bit about the community practice at the end of my presentation, but largely we've done that through our network spaces, which have been in the past, working groups, task teams, collaboratives. They've had all sorts of different kinds of names. We've streamlined that recently so that we just operate through working groups and reference groups and our language communities. And then we bring our stakeholders together to foster dialogue or to advance research or build an evidence base towards shared solutions. So currently, we have some thematic areas that we're really focused on, among which, as was mentioned at the start, we have inclusive education. We also have psychosocial support and social and emotional learning. So as many of you will know, there's a great deal of evidence now which recognises the fact that well-being, and in particular psychological well-being, is absolutely fundamental within the education response and within education emergencies in particular, as providing the foundation for all kinds of development, and including the basis for academic learning outcomes. So the PSS and SEL working group have worked to develop tools and resources and develop knowledge around the role of PSS and SEL within education in emergencies. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So there are a few resources that have been developed over the years. Starting in 2016, INEE developed a background paper looking at PSS and SEL within emergency settings, and then this was turned into a guidance note. So all of our INEE developed tools and resources are anchored in the INEE minimum standards. So this guidance note is structured around the 5 domains of the minimum standards. Just a quick brief opportunity to mention there that the minimum standards is currently going through an update process, and you can have a look on our website. I'll share all these links afterwards, but you can have a look on our website about how that update process is going and different ways to get involved there. From this guidance note, we developed a training module in 2019, which is really to condense down the content of the guidance note and can be delivered over an abridged version of 3 hours or a 5-hour training session. And that's really for any stakeholders working within education in emergencies to get a real grounding in the fundamentals of the importance of providing PSS and SEL within education. And then this last one is just a recent toolkit that we developed, which is essentially a collation of existing materials that specifically focus on delivering PSS and SEL through distance education. So of course, this was prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we had a look across existing tools and resources and kind of vetted them and created this brief toolkit. We could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The big, gigantic project that we've been working on for the past, well, it's now complete, but this began at the end of 2019, was to develop this PSS and SEL toolbox in partnership with Harvard University and their ESOL lab. So that's ecological approaches to social and emotional learning. And I could do a whole session on this toolbox someday if that's of interest to any of you. But this project really takes a look at what existing tools and resources are used to implement PSS and SEL in education in emergency settings, and compare the terms, compare how things are defined, and then helps users select frameworks that might fit their setting, or adapt existing frameworks, or even develop your own framework from scratch. So within that, there are localizing tools, which are great big long processes, but which would help stakeholders to develop their own framework. And then onto the next slide. And the second kind of main area of focus that the working group has been working on for the past few years is around teacher wellbeing, and really championing and advocating for teacher wellbeing, not only as a means to improve student wellbeing and student developmental outcomes, but as a very important end unto itself. So through this project, we did mapping and gap analysis of existing tools and resources. We developed a guidance note, again, which maps to the minimum standards. And then we did some work with 4 teams in Palestine, Colombia, Kakuma refugee camp, and Myanmar at the tertiary education level in Myanmar, to contextualize this guidance note for use within those settings. And then finally, we have a training pack, which is there to help planning at a sector level to address wellbeing. So we know that wellbeing sits across different systems and structures, from the individual to the school to the community to the local, national, and so on. And this this training pack is to help really from the government and from the cluster perspective, to convene stakeholders around addressing teacher wellbeing across that socio-ecological model. So just we move on to the next slide, just to say that in general, the kind of tools and resources that we develop at INEE are, of course, global goods. So they are there to be taken, used, adapted, contextualized for use in across a variety of settings. And there's always going to be that tension between the local and the global when you're looking at standard setting. And that's something we're really interested in looking at. When it comes to responding to emergent crises like those, like that of Turkey and Syria recently with the earthquake response, INEE tends to rapidly collate existing resources, not just that we've developed, but across our membership, that would be available in the languages of operation there, so Arabic, Turkish, English. So this resource page was pulled together by our knowledge management coordinator. Within that list, you will see that there are also other collated lists, because lots of organizations and networks will do a similar thing to say, like, what's here, what do we have now? I guess one of the things to mention here is that INEE operates in 5 languages: Arabic, English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And so when this crisis happened, we were looking to find, of course, our resources exist in Arabic, but looking to find translations into Turkish. And then there's a big strain on anyone who's doing translation work in Turkish at that time. So briefly then, I think this is my last slide. Oh, sorry, back the other way. Oh, sorry, no, that's it, perfect. Oh, sorry, yes, community practice, great. So just to say that, as well as our working groups, in the past, Ayman can correct me, but I think we established the community of practice in 2021. So this is an online community of practice that is open to all INEE members. To become an INEE member, as I say, you just sign up on our website, and then you can join the community of practice. This operates through a platform called Slack, which some of you will be really familiar with. For some of you, it will be new. And this is a space that INEE created to be able to facilitate more of those peer-to-peer connections amongst the members of our network, and also to provide channels for communication or discussion or developing or sharing knowledge around specific areas of interest. So we have channels in all the INEE languages, like general channel, and then we have specific thematic channels like MHPSS and SEL, distance education, gender, and also we're open to members proposing new channels, so maybe around emerging areas of interest, or maybe members find that there's a gap and there's no channel that looks at, for example, Syria or Turkey or Ukraine was a new channel that obviously was developed recently. And Ayman will speak a little bit more then about those kind of connections between members and how members can support one another sort of bilaterally and within these smaller communities of practice. So over to you then, Ayman.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to start by thanking the Global Campaign for Education for this kind of invitation to present in this wonderful gathering of colleagues. Just to start, I'm going to speak a little bit about the INEE Arabic language community, which, as my colleague Rochelle has indicated, it's one of the 5 active language communities operating at INEE alongside the Spanish, Portuguese, English, and the French. The Arabic language community plays an important role in facilitating knowledge and making connection with community of educators, teachers, parents, working all together in education in emergency context with the Arabic language community, more specifically in the MENA region. The language community, the Arabic language community, is really a vibrant place, allowing large number of diverse of educators from the Middle East, North Africa, and also some of the other Arabic-speaking countries in East Africa to share learning, expand knowledge, and also voice their stories. As you can see in the slide, the Arabic language community is currently have up to 1,085 members. As Rochelle mentioned, the membership is free to join INEE and the Arabic language community, and we have added the link in the chat box. The Arabic language community live and work in 110 countries around the world. The members are also presented in numerous organizations and bodies such as international organization, local organization, UN agencies, government institutions, community-based organization, think tanks, academic institutions such as universities, students, etc. I meant to add this important point for me as the Arabic language community facilitator for INEE, is that Arabic is the fourth most spoken language globally, yet unfortunately less than 3% of the digital content online is available in Arabic. And here at INEE, with the support of the devoted group of members from the Arabic speaking countries, has worked tirelessly to ensure the quality of content available in the INEE Arabic website and other platforms. And the reason for that is just allow us to reach more educator actors in crisis and emergency settings. At INEE, we provide various means of communication for the Arabic language community members to ensure their voices are represented and learning is facilitated in their mother tongue in Arabic. As we all know, in the last couple of years, with the protracted conflicts, probably this is more relevant to the last couple of years in terms of pandemic, but also the protracted emergency and conflict that has been happening for, unfortunately, more than decades in the region, has brought numerous challenges for education communities in the region. But despite that, we have confronted new ways of teaching, learning, meeting, working. And these challenges actually have provided us with a unique opportunity to build our Arabic language community and reach out to new members. And that's through conducting online webinars, meetings, roundtables, training, mostly virtually, which allow us to even reach more to people who are in need to knowledge and who are and provide more spaces for them and to share stories, experiences, and knowledge from the ground. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. The localities of the stories and experiences and the voices are actually at the heart of the Arabic language community and at the heart of the INEE as a mission. And that's because we believe that every context is really different and unique. And that's why the Country Focal Point initiatives has been so instrumental in fulfilling this objective. At INEE, we do have this INEE Country Focal Point initiative that was born to provide spaces for local educators, teachers, parents, NGOs, and other education stakeholders and actors to actually network, share lived experiences. These experiences full of diversity. As I mentioned, every context is special, is unique, which I would say this has been super beneficial for members. Though many countries in the region go through protracted conflict, crisis, IDP, refugees, situations, there are much knowledge being produced at the local level that can be shared with other contexts and that can be beneficial to other members to replicate these experiences, taken into consideration, as Rachel mentioned, the locality of the context. These members being together in meetings, workshops, share spaces, have provided learning opportunities for members, resource sharing, spaces to write and document these local experiences. And what I have observed over these years of working with really beautiful colleagues and members in the region is that so much stories and narrative and experiences in the field of education are actually not documented. And there is a big gap there that needs to be addressed at all level. So one of the things that we brought ourselves with is that we provide the spaces for members to continue to document their stories and share it in blogs, articles, voice out these stories in meetings, webinars, roundtables, virtual meetings. So this has been really also, this initiative has been very informative to the Arabic language community members. So now, alongside the other group of country focal points in MENA region, we do have 3 focal points. We have in Jordan, Libya, Yemen, working side by side to support the Arabic language community and its members. I'll be adding in the chat box more details about the country focal initiative for more information. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks so much, Amy. So part of the Arabic language community functions is organizing and supporting convening the country member through online and face-to-face when possible meetings. Recently, we hold meetings on the BSS-SEL targeting teachers in Beirut, in Lebanon, after the explosion took place in Beirut port. Members who are teachers reach out to us requesting that there is a gap in BSS-SEL and how we can rise their teacher motivation to continue delivering education in this unfortunately troubling context. So there was an orientation session on the BSS-SEL. We also conducted some of these trainings around inclusive education targeting teachers in Jordan, alongside the minimum standards for education emergency trainings that took place or takes place regularly in the region. Another point which is really important to mention is that the Arabic language community facilitate advocacy. For example, lately we hosted in the last, I would say, couple of years, a number of roundtables around refugee education, IDPs, Syrian teachers, so collating all these inputs from them and put it in reports and through webinars and raise their voices to be shared at the higher level. So these stories don't just stay at the local level, but it is shared with the wider community. And the last point is enhancing facilitation of skills and virtual meetings and for moderation of engagement in the INEE community of practice, including hands-on learning, Zoom, Slack, and other media platform, as Rochelle mentioned, which allows sharing resources and technical support for members. If we can go to the next slide, please. And yes, and as I spoke earlier on about the network space that INEE Arabic language community has created for members to connect actually at professionally build relationships, share learning. I should say that it was really beautifully manifested after the catastrophic earthquake that took place that hit both Turkey and Syria a few months back. That member, and this is a really important aspect that I really would like to shed light on, is that member extended solidarity and heartfelt support with each other at the time of crisis, at the time of emergencies. The next day after the earthquake took place, the various Arabic language community platform organically, members started to share resources around BSS-SEL, mental health education, trauma education, and we know these kind of intervention are really important response and intervention right after an emergency takes place. So these resources, were shared. We're sharing their resources among themselves, support each other, express solidarity and sympathy with each other, which is really important. As Rochelle indicated, these resources were either collated by INEE, but does not include the INEE resources alongside other existing resources at the local level, and ensure that these resources are as accessible as possible to members in various languages, including Arabic and Turkish. Next slide. Just wanted to thank you so much for listening and providing me with this opportunity to share and to be part of this wonderful group. Thank you so much.
This is really terrific. Thank you both for your amazing work on this. And yeah, I'll put in the chat just to pull some of the questions. And Annie, please, maybe if you'd like to kick us off, I'll also share in the chat box some other resources that we've heard from our colleagues on the early childhood front with ECDAN, and thanks to colleagues joining from IRC, others who have been really active, and not just on the important work happening in Syria and Turkey, but just to say if there's any current response on helping to make sure education and right from the start, issues impacting children and youth are fully included, we would welcome that. Over to you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Rachel and Ayman, for sharing all your wonderful resources. We'll be sure to send them all out in our follow-up email. And I see that, Rachel, you've been answering questions in the chat, so we encourage everyone to continue asking questions in the chat and sharing your thoughts. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Giulia McPherson from Jesuit Refugee Service, USA.
Great, thanks, Annie, appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Operations at Jesuit Refugee Service, based here in Washington, D.C. And Jennifer and her team asked me to join today to present a bit of an update on last month's high-level financing conference hosted by Education Cannot Wait. So there may have been others here in the group who participated as well. I coordinated a US-based group of organizations, GCE-US members primarily, to prepare sort of a US-focused advocacy campaign in the lead up to the high-level financing conference. So I wanted to share just an update on the preparations leading up to the conference and some of the outcomes of the conference, in particular related to some of the resources that were mobilized as part of this effort. So Annie, feel free to go to the next slide. Just in terms of some of the basics, the conference took place again last month in Geneva from February 16th to the 17th. It was a two-day event with hundreds of participants from all over the world. I know that the staff at the ECW Secretariat spent many months planning for the event. And you can see from some of the pictures that it was spectacular in a lot of ways. It was co-convened with the governments of Colombia, Germany, Niger, Norway, South Sudan, and Switzerland. So there was, a very sort of global dimension to the 2 days. I think a lot of thought and energy went into the planning process. And I know some of the folks here as well took part in leading on some of the side events. But I would say both the side events and the plenary sessions were really tremendous and boosted this overall effort to continue to build political will and support for education in emergency settings. The primary goal of the conference was to generate commitments for financing that linked directly to ECW's report that they released last week, documenting that there are over 222 million children and adolescents living in crisis and conflict settings. And this figure has gone up tremendously since COVID. It used to be about 75 million. And in conjunction with that, ECW last year released its strategic plan, 2023 to 2026 strategic plan, where they set a goal of mobilizing $1.5 billion in new funding to reach some of those 222 million children and adolescents who don't have access to quality, inclusive, and transformative education. So that was the primary goal for the event. Annie, if you can go over to the next slide. And I mentioned that we here in the US gathered together in the lead up to the conference to generate a strong commitment from the US government in particular ahead of the conference. So we organized an advocacy campaign And some of the organizations that took part are listed here. So included, of course, GCE-US, Global Citizen, IPNED, NABU, Results, Save the Children, World Vision US, and UNICEF USA. And our primary goal was to really engage with representatives within the US government to really have a robust presence at the conference, and also to make a strong commitment, financial commitment at the conference. So in our preparation during the development of this campaign, we put together a case for investment and took a look at the US government's current commitment, and then also looking ahead to the need and ECW's fundraising goal, and determined that we would coalesce around a unified ask of urging the US government to make an intended pledge of at least $158 million over 4 years. Currently, in the latest fiscal year budget that was passed by the US government, the US has committed $30 million. It used to be in the previous 3 years was $25 million. So we were really pleased that the US government in its last appropriations process increased that level to 30 million. But again, we were looking at the longer term over the course of the strategic plan of ECW, looking at the need and, looking to be ambitious in terms of the goal that we set forth. We also knew that this sort of multi-year ask was aspirational. The US government historically has not made a multi-year ask related to education, and even in other sectors for health, for example, there is some precedent where there's been an intended pledge. But you can see the language there, intended, again, given our appropriations process and Congress needing to pass budgets before the US government could spend any of those resources, the government, we know, needs to be careful about the language that's used. There has been a bit of precedent with GPE replenishment conference. So for any folks who have been involved in that in the past, we know that in previous years, the US government has come to the table with what could be seen as a multi-year pledge, but it typically has not been new money. It's been money that has already been appropriated. So our ask, again, was ambitious in that we were looking ahead as well as looking at what has already been approved by the US Congress. So we developed this case for investment, again, making the argument for why the US government should come to the table with this robust pledge. We disseminated the case for investment widely across the US government. We organized and conducted bilateral meetings with representatives from USAID, from the State Department PRM. Both of those agencies work collaboratively on ECW in terms of staffing the US government presence on ECW's governance committees, and also coordinating in terms of how that funding is organized. So, so our targets were both USAID, PRM, and then of course members of Congress, just to make sure that they were aware of this initiative and laying the groundwork for future funding processes. The photo here is from an event that the group organized with GCE's lead at Georgetown University in January. It included both a high level and a youth panel discussion to talk about why it's important to invest in these programs. And you can see in this picture, we had representatives from both USAID and PRM participate. And we're really happy with their messaging during the event. They were able to strongly express their support for ECW and talk about how ECW allows the US government to mobilize quickly in times of emergencies when the US government itself can't necessarily move that quickly. So, so coupling this multilateral partnership and also bilateral US government funding proves to be a good sort of combination in terms of being able to really mobilize again in these kinds of circumstances. And then finally, we focused on grassroots mobilization, each of us sort of reaching out to our specific networks, but also with Global Citizens lead and being able to generate some strong grassroots activity around our case for investment. So if you want to go to the next slide, just a sort of a wrap up in terms of the results of the conference. So there was a big pledging moment the first day of the conference in the morning, and countries were able to publicly announce their commitments. Overall, the conference raised over $826 million from 17 donors, and that included contributions from 5 new donors. So that was exciting to see some new donors come to the table. Overall, Germany remains ECW's largest donor. They came to the conference with a new commitment of about $224 million in funding. The United Kingdom provided the largest new commitment, announcing 80 million pounds in new funding to ECW. And then the US government came in at $43 million. So clearly below our ask, but we were happy in that they were able to come to the table with the funding that had already been appropriated, most of the funding that had already been appropriated by the US government. They weren't able to take that next step and look ahead and pledge, make that sort of intended pledge for future funding levels. But we do know that given the current dynamics in the US Congress, it is going to be challenging for us to retain or increase those funding levels. So we understand that their approach was pretty realistic and conservative. But we were happy with their commitment. The delegation that took part was, represented both the teams at USAID and PRM, and the delegation that they sent, was a strong one. Samantha Power was not able to participate in person, but recorded an announcement for the conference itself, and they showed that announcement during the pledging moment. So it was a strong representation from the U.S. side of things, and just mentioned here, I mentioned it at the top, that I think it was really fantastic that just the quality of the plenary sessions and the side events. There was a broad range of discussions that took place with youth and persons with disabilities featured very prominently. So I think the ECW team really took a lot of feedback from civil society into consideration, and was very consistent in trying to be as open and inclusive as possible in terms of the program. I think that's the last slide. Is that correct? So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have in terms of follow-up. We've regrouped as a campaign group to do our own sort of internal briefing. We're following up with some colleagues at ECW and with members of Congress in particular now, just looking at the next step in terms of trying to ensure continued U.S. government engagement on this. And we'll continue to do that in the coming weeks and months. So, and again, this is primarily from a U.S. government perspective. But if anyone else has any other thoughts or perspectives from your specific vantage point, we welcome those as well. But again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Giulia, for sharing these key updates, and thanks to all of you for your advocacy and the lead up to this really critical high-level financing conference. Yes, Jennifer said in the chat, all please type your questions and comments in the chat box if you have any questions, or if you would like to get involved in continued advocacy for education and emergencies. Next, Jennifer.
Sorry, Annie, I just wanted to say, I know Giulia covered so much there, and we're just really grateful to Giulia for chairing the GCE-US Education and Emergencies Working Group and for her continued leadership on this. And if anybody wants to get involved in that group, please let us know. We can share our contact information in the chat as well. Like Giulia referenced, there's ongoing work and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the announcements, but just wanted to take a moment to plug. We would love everybody's involvement in joining the community letter that includes fiscal year 2024 advocacy to Congress around the need for education cannot wait funding to increase, as well as all of the international basic education and global partnership for education contributions from US government. So your voice, your organization's involvement is so critical there. Huge thanks to the close to 20 groups that have already signed on to that letter, but if you haven't had a chance to already, we'll share that and just wanted to encourage everyone to get involved. Giulia, was there anything else you wanted to mention about ways people can help moving forward? I know you all are doing the JRS USA Advocacy Day in 1 week. So
yeah, unfortunately, RSVPs are closed for that. But yes, we're hosting an Advocacy Day a week from today, where we will actually be talking about funding levels for fiscal year 2024 in terms of international basic education, and then also funding specifically for ECW. So thanks for GCE support and for that event as well. But we look forward to generating some more support around this issue next week as well.
Perfect. Thank you. And thanks to Suzanne for the question. The advocacy letter is designed for organizations to sign, so please do spread it far and wide across your networks. But we will also share as follow-up. There are absolutely individual actions people can take, and we're happy to do trainings, help people reach out to your members of Congress, make it easy for you. So if individuals, everybody's voice is critical here. Individuals, organizations, youth and student leaders, teachers, you name it. And yeah, if there are other questions or ideas for follow-up, please let us know. Thanks so much, Giulia. And over to you, Annie.
Thank you both. So without further ado, we're glad to have Ann Hayes, the founding partner and executive director at Inclusive Development Partners. And Ann will wonderfully share all the great work that they're doing to help improve the accessibility of early grade math assessments. So I will share Ann's slides.
Great. So what I'm going to talk about today is really sort of the sister of Universal Design for Learning, which has really taken on a lot more interest and people are really adopting it, which is exciting to see. But that's really the first step, because if you only have Universal Design for Learning, but do not do Universal Design for Assessment, then often we're not gauging people's learning in that same sort of way. So what we did through support from World Bank was to really look about how you could go about Universal Design for Learning and using early grade math assessments as a basis for that. So if you want to go to the next slide. One of my favorites, it's, for fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Obviously the penguin and the fish won't do as well as, say, the monkey. And I think this is what we do a lot in our testing. For example, we do a lot of word problems, and I have a daughter, I am dyslexic and have a daughter who's dyslexic. And really, what does that, it's really testing literacy. So she will do worse on the word problems because she's just having a hard time understanding what's being asked. And so really, what are we trying to learn? And are we giving our students and our beneficiaries a way to show their best way of learning? So if you want to go to the next. What is Universal Design for Assessment? It's really taking away those barriers to really get down to what do kids know and how are they learning? And it builds on this sort of assessments and accessibility to break down for all learners. One thing I think we have, and this is something we talk a lot in our toolkit, is the difference between accommodations and modifications. And even if you do Universal Design for Assessment, some kids are still going to need more. They're going to need some accommodations, but hopefully they'll have less. There'll be less needs if you design a test that's really for everyone. So it's really bringing down those barriers, as I said, in the idea for people who are dyslexic, they may need the word problem read to them. But do they understand that concept and that construct? So if we go to the next. Oh. And then this builds on this sort of main principles of UDL. So multiple means of engagement. So motivating kids, even in their testing, multiple means of representation. So how do we present it in a different way. And then really on this one is really big is multiple means of expression and action. So allowing kids to express things in different ways, to show their learning in different ways. But even though that's the main component of UDL or UDA, you really want those other two components to be integrated in as well. So if we go to the next. So we received funding from the World Bank to develop a toolkit on universal design for assessment. We just got updates as of yesterday that we're having our internal review panel. It's a senior level at the end of April. So we're hoping that we can have a toolkit ready for dissemination in May, if not early summer. The audience of this is World Bank staff, education practitioners, test developers, and researchers. It's not really meant for teachers because it's more of the evidence base. And I think for teachers, we'd want to create much more localized, much more meaningful, and maybe different language would be used to just really capture what their needs are. So as part of this, we did a pilot into Tajikistan, which I can talk about next. If we go to the next slide. So we did this pilot in Tajikistan, which I was super excited about. It was with Chemonics and at Intersect, and they were just about ready to roll out IGMA. So we were able to come in and say, well, what if we developed an accessible IGMA? And what we were able to do was compare the standard IGMA to the accessible IGMA, and then see how learning outcomes were assessed. Unfortunately, we weren't able to really look at children with disabilities because we didn't have, in Tajikistan, they don't identify often kids with low incidence or kids with less prominent disabilities. So, and then those that have more visible disabilities, such as those who are blind or deaf or intellectual, are educated in separate settings, and we didn't have access to those schools. However, we do know that those kids are in the classroom. They exist. There's kids with low vision, low hearing. There's kids with dysgraphia, dyslexia. They're just not attentional deficit disorders. They're just not being identified. So we made the assumption that those might be some of the struggling learners, and we're able to kind of see how those struggling learners did. We had a lot of lessons learned from this, of which we put into the toolkit. And to say this was just the first, we need to do this sort of testing again and again, looking at EGRAs, looking at different tests to really build that evidence base of why we need these accessible tools. So if you go to the next slide. Yep, I just kind of talked about those. And if you could hit, I think this is sort of tiered. So if you could just kind of, there we go, and do it again. So one of the things we did was going to that question of motivation. So we did word problems as one of the subtasks, but the kids got to choose their topic. So you got to choose if you wanted, I think it was transportation, animals, food, or sports. And the kids really liked this because they felt like in ownership and in charge. And actually, you know, I think our last speakers talked a lot about emergencies. This is also a core component of social, emotional, and trauma informed, is giving kids choice and feeling powerful. So even though this is a UDL component, this also would help those children who are going through trauma. So we added pictures. The pictures were very complicated. We had to kind of pull back and make sure we weren't changing the construct or giving too much information, that we weren't making the test easier, but really just showing it in different ways. And they could answer however they wanted. In the traditional one, you either had to write it down or say it, but we also had, I guess you only had to write it down, but you could say it out loud. We had manipulatives. So if the answer, say, was 7, you could show 7 in all these different ways. You could pull, 7 bottle caps over and say 7, or write it, or point to the number 7. The answer wasn't so much that you could write, but that you knew the answer. And so if you go to the next slide. And the pilot results were really, really interesting. And One is that I think this really embraces the concept of UDL and UDA, is that girls performed much better on the accessible IGMA versus the standard IGMA. And if you look at what really UDA and UDL are, it's really to make it better for all. It was designed for kids with disabilities, but we realize it's really making it better for gender, for ethnicity, for trauma. And so it's just a better pedagogy. The other things that we talked about is the struggling learners. Those did much better in the accessible IGMA. And again, we don't know why those kids are struggling. They could be struggling because they see abuse at night every time. They could be, they just lost a family member, or they could be because they have an unidentified disability. But at the end of the day, it's most important to not, for me, I think it's less important to understand why there's, what is it that label, but how do we help them learn? And I think when we started this, there was a lot of concerns that it was going to change the test, or it was going to be too burdensome. But the teachers really found it to be more, I guess, instinctual. They thought it made more sense. They liked it. And it only took 1 more minute to administer. So by doing it better, it was not necessarily more time consuming. So I think we were able to kind of take away some of these myths. And now if we go to the next slide. So we're taking these concepts and we're putting it into a toolkit. A lot of it is learning off of this Tajikistan experience, but also saying if people are looking to do the same, what would we have done differently? What are some of the lessons learned in this pilot? So, and I think another big aspect, as I mentioned before, is the difference between accommodations and modifications. So accommodations, just very quickly, even though it's really complex, is giving supports, versus modifications is changing the construct. So if you give the tool or the test in larger font, that's an accommodation. If you let kids take it in a quieter classroom, that's accommodation. If you simplify the test, that's a modification. And what we're finding is that sometimes when we're going through and we're adapting these tests for children with disabilities, we've gone too far and we've gone from giving accommodations to modifications. And what happens is when you change the test, now you can no longer compare that test to the standard test. We see this a lot in adapting early grade reading tests for children who are deaf. And so what happens is now you can only compare children who are deaf who took that test, but you can't compare children who are deaf to children who are hearing. And that's what we really need to know is, are we teaching things differently that this group of children are being left behind? So we really want to switch the accommodations versus modifications. Just to kind of show how big of an issue it is, it's actually in US law now that we cannot do standardized modifications and all children have to take the same test with accommodations, because we found that when we were modifying this, especially for children with intellectual disabilities, they no longer got access to the curriculum. So they were learning colors or basic numbers instead of having an adaptive curriculum. So this is law and something that we've taken a lot of consideration. And I think we can learn as we import things into low-income settings to replicate the good practices and kind of leapfrog some of those bad practices. We talk a lot about accessibility. If you're doing a test, maybe everything should be in 18 font instead of 12 font. And then looking at these large-scale assessments and lessons learned and evidence-based practices, and then also trying to look at classroom. And so what do you do for a chalkboard? What do you do for computer testing? So recognizing all the different ways in which we assess children. One of the things I really enjoyed was the so what? We don't just assess to assess. We need to figure out how we can start using that data to help children. And one of the ways we often use data to help children is what's called response to intervention, which so far has been mainly used in high-income countries. So what we did was we brought together experts in response to intervention from the US that had some international. We brought in international experts doing this, and we said, how would you adapt this? What things don't apply? And then what things could be done differently? And we have some suggestions on that. And again, maybe it's not ready for everyone, but we need to start taking steps to use this data to help the students. That's our end goal. We have some annexes as well on considerations for children who are blind, or children who are deaf, children who are deaf-blind, which often get left out, and then children with complex disabilities. So children who have maybe intellectual disabilities or autism, they need a lot of support. And then we have the next one slide. This is just a little picture that we have to kind of really talk about the difference between accommodations and understanding that there's different ways of accommodations, that giving accommodations to every student, you know, what you can give and how do you sort of suggest this, like extended time for those that may have a hard time focusing, breaks, using calculator for some of those kids, which is totally fine if the issue isn't, you know, knowing those basics. So understanding the construct and then making sure we're giving those accommodations without changing the entire ability. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, and this is, I'll end on this. So personal, I am a mother of 2 children, and my son falls in that complex disability. He is nonverbal. And we had situations where people thought because he is nonverbal and uses an iPad or AAC to talk, that he couldn't learn. And we just had an experience in middle school that pushed him back to literally had him folding towels. So we moved him and we made a lot of complaints. And he has a new teacher that found ways to adapt his tests. And he can do point to the letters. So he has big letters and he points to letters, and you can see someone else writes it in for him. But when they found out that he could do this, he is reading and is getting a legitimate A in science. So I think this is really important. You know, UDA is not just a concept. It's really, if we don't apply it, who are we leaving behind? Which is really the core of this group, right? That we don't want to leave those people behind. We want to be able to do it. And sometimes it takes creativity to do this. And this to me is such a great example because this is an accommodated test, not a modified test. So yes, so thank you. I think this is hopefully something we can all learn from and start really applying in our interventions and as our teacher training instructions. So thank you so much.
And this was remarkable. And thanks for sharing your personal story. You have a lot in the chat box. I don't see any immediate questions, but just more gratitude. But does anybody have any questions specifically? You know, lots of people are chiming in with, you know, the chance to come across more UDA information. We're really grateful for this preview. And please keep us all posted as you work with the World Bank and others. I guess a question I would have for you and colleagues, we know that the Inclusive Education Initiative at the World Bank is sort of in that process of either transitioning or sunsetting as we go into the World Bank IMF spring meetings very soon here. And have you been getting a sense from colleagues there, or does anybody have a sense of what might be happening and if there are things that we can do as advocates to help to make sure that this really important work doesn't close? You know, it might either be moved, integrated across the World Bank, or perhaps the IEI would have a different host at some point. And it does look like there, Jackie asked a question about the accessing the table about accommodations, and Stephanie kindly already shared it. So great, thank you, Anne. Any answers or reflections that you think would be helpful before we move on? Sorry, Ann Hayes, do you have anything that you want to add?
Oh, no, just thank you. Hopefully, you know, I think we were really excited that for the World Bank that the reason it's been delayed is because it took a higher level of review. So it's now a senior staff. So that gives it a higher profile, which I think really shows that they're taking this issue very seriously. It has delayed it, but I think it's worth it. So once we have that, we can get a better sense of how the World Bank is going to look at this and what we need to do. And I think what our real goal would be is to do more of these pilots and to stop using the standard IGMA. That this really needs to be, if this works for children, we look at IGRA differently in IGMA. We are talking a little bit to USAID, who's looking to update their guidance on IGRA. And they were really excited about this and said, well, how do we just put this in from the very beginning so that IGRA starts being, starts accessible. So I think there's going to hopefully be some way to move. And once we have this tool, we'll send it out and hope that it's used, and would encourage people then to also, take it and modify it for teachers for those contexts. So thank you.
That's really terrific. Thank you so much. Annie, do you want to introduce our next speakers?
Yeah, thank you so much. And there's a lot of kudos in the chat box.
Apologies. It looks like we do have a hand raised from Augustine that I just noticed. Please come in. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Augustine from Sierra Leone, Education for All Coalition, and on the presentation which was just completed by our colleague here on EGMA and EG was really, really excellent. My clarification, which we have different learners, what we are using, for example, those physically challenged learners and those disabled learners, and which they are not hearing, and what are the methods which they are using to assess them in terms of the EGMA and the EGRA during their implementation, if they have any new learning around that, which they can also share with us so that we'll be able to know that, because what Sierra Leone is currently doing, our recent compact which we are putting together, it is focused on EGMA and EGRA, foundational learning, because it is a genesis of education. And colleagues here have presented something very, very good on EGMA. So I just want to learn whether they have any specific learning which we are using for those sets of learners, which we can buy in from there. Thank you. Over to
Yeah, so we have that as part of the annex. There are some things that you need to do for children who are deaf. It's a different, and that's probably right now the most complex because it does assume sign language. So what we're learning from across different programming is sometimes you have to kind of get a sense of their sign language before you can do, and you need sign language enumerators. I think for other children, for people who are blind, it needs to be in Braille. And what they do need is more time. It takes longer to read Braille than to read standard writing. So their timed learning and their time things on IGRA would be longer. So instead of 5 minutes, it would probably be 10, which would be the equivalent of a vision person's reading. And I think for children who have a hard time with, physical challenges, the question is, can they write? And if that's a challenge, then they should be able to give their answers orally or verbally. So I think it's looking at what are those barriers to how they express, and then how can we take that down? Because again, as I said, the answer isn't so important that they write the number 7, but that they know the answer 7. And so allowing them to respond in that way is more important. Or even point to the number 7. Some people who can't speak, that my son would have to point to 7. And so just really allowing what you do is you allow all those options on the table, and kids will just pick the one that makes the most sense to them. And so if you give those options, they know intuitively. And it's same as even adults, if you gave all the options, we probably would just go to the one that fits our skill set the best. So we do talk about that a lot and think through how we can, do it. But the difference is that you give every child that option. Because again, if you are a minority language learner, you may not feel comfortable saying things out loud because you're afraid you're saying it wrong, but you might be comfortable pointing. So it's really giving it across all students.
That's great. Thanks. And sorry, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine. Fantastic question. And as soon as Anne has these materials, we'll make sure to share them far and wide, because you can see clearly there's strong demand. Crystal asked if there's an intention for a formal launch and rollout of the UDA toolkit, including with Ministry of Educations.
I don't know yet. You know, the world, for us that work in the USAID world, it's funny, the World Bank has even more red tape. So we're kind of learning this along the way, but we do hope, I think the World Bank will do that, and we hope to get that out. And it would be wonderful to find ways to get this out to ministries of education. I think we'll also look at ways to maybe share this with the Conference of State Parties in New York. And then getting it just out to the right people so they can share with the ministers who may not be showing up at those events. But yeah, I think and then hopefully this will be a first version, and we'll have more input. And as we learn, for people that start doing more of this, it can be improved, and it can be a ownership by the community to kind of keep building it.
Super helpful. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Keep the ideas coming. Thanks, Annie. Over to you.
Thanks, everyone. And without further ado, I'm glad to hand it over to our colleague, Nakaibale, Lynda from the UNESCO SDG for Youth Network.
Thank you so much, Annie. I hope I'm audible enough. Oh yeah, perfect. My name is Lynda, and I am a member of the UNESCO SDG for Youth Network, and I will be talking about the Global Youth Initiative. But to start off my presentation, I would like us to watch a message or a video on the Global Youth Initiative.
We might not be hearing the audio with the video. Of course, just a little bit ago, we tested and it worked. There we go. Thank you.
At the Transforming Education Summit in September 2022, the Youth Declaration was launched, presenting the collective vision, demands, and commitments from youth on transforming education across the globe.
This declaration is not just words on paper, it is the future. We are innovative problem solvers whose thoughts and opinions have power and whose collective actions will change this world. The youth of the world have made it clear in the Youth Declaration and will continue this process today, which will inform a broader global youth initiative.
To help shape the Global Youth Initiative, which will be led by the SDG for Youth Network, regional youth consultations have taken place across the world, highlighting local needs for support and action.
Nosotros tenemos increíbles ideas y sabemos que es lo que necesitamos de nuestra educación para estar preparados para los desafíos del futuro.
A lot of people have been refugees or displaced in my country, and we hope that we can use this platform as well in order to provide sustainable solutions to those people.
When you say investment, it doesn't always have to be financial. The young people appreciate being visible and having their inputs being taken into high consideration.
How can we manage budgets and put financing into more useful ways to help support education? How can we make partnerships between the private and public sector? And how can we really use our resources and activate as youth activists to make these initiatives happen and create the change?
انتوا التغيير، وانتوا اللي بتصنعوا الفرق، وانتوا بتصنعوا المستقبل، وانتوا بإرادتكم وعزيمتكم وتكاتفكم واحلامكم بتصنعوا اللي مستحيل انه ينصنع. وبالاخير بدي اقول لكم انه من المهم جدا.
Peace is one of the most important components of education.
The Global Youth Initiative will be launched on the International Day of Education on January 24th, 2023. Without engaging young people, there is no shared ownership. Without shared ownership, there is no commitment. Without commitment, there is no transformations. We need to turn words into action. Let's join forces to continue growing a global education movement. We count on all of you to help us make this happen.
Well, okay, thank you so much, Annie. I've seen a question in the chat box. Yes, my colleagues will be sharing the link to the video. It's on YouTube, and feel free to check it out and share with partners and within your networks. So as Annie projects my presentation, I will go ahead and just talk about what got us to the Global Youth Initiative. And I need to mention that last year, 2022, we had the pre-summit in France, and then also the Transforming Education Summit in New York. And to those of you that were able to participate in the pre-summit, the young people there were able to participate in in-person consultation on the Youth Declaration for Transforming Education, but also give the recommendations on what they think should be done to improve education globally. So the Youth Declaration, which outlines the collective visions, proposals, and commitments from youth on transforming education, has over 25 bold demands on transforming education. And these were generated from the online, global, regional, and grassroots consultations conducted by young people. I'm hoping some of you are on this call. Yes, young people from over 170 countries, and 500,000 youth globally really participated in ensuring that their voices are heard. And the Youth Declaration for Transforming Education is the document representing your voices, our voices in the process of transforming education. So the Youth Declaration is really the basis for the Global Youth Initiative. The Youth Declaration mainly shows diverse voices, LGBTQIs, refugees, persons with disabilities. All the 25 bold demands are tackling some of those components, because we want to ensure that every young person, every youth in all that diversity are actually meaningfully engaged in the process of transforming education. And just like most of us, we didn't want to just have a document that is beautiful but kept in the shelves and gathering dust. So in order to take forward the demands identified by young people during tests and in the Youth Declaration, the Global Youth Initiative was formed. I'll kindly take me back to the previous slide, Annie, if that's okay. The previous slide. No, that one. Yes, that one. The second slide. Yes. Yes, so I was saying that the Youth Declaration is the basis for the Global Youth Initiative that was launched on International Education Day. And the Global Youth Initiative is the first multi-stakeholder global initiative aimed at ensuring meaningful youth engagement and leadership in education policy making. We've had conversations of young people saying, we want to get involved, but what does meaningful youth engagement actually look like? So the Global Youth Initiative is aimed at ensuring that young people are not just consulted, but are actually meaningfully engaged in the whole process of transforming education, whether it is decision-making or actual implementation of education policies at the grassroots, at the national level, but most importantly, also holding leaders accountable. So the Global Youth Initiative is part of the Summit Follow-Up Strategy, and it falls under the Global TEST initiatives. So this initiative has over 3 pillars. Next slide, please. Has over, yes, this is the journey I was talking about. The Global Youth Initiative has over 3 pillars. But before we get into that, I realized I didn't take you through the whole journey. I rushed to the Global Initiative. Kindly take me back to the previous slide. with the journey, yes. So we had the youth declaration launched at TESS, and it was presented to the Secretary General. And shortly after that, in October, we had bi-weekly partners meetings, and some of these partners include World Bank, UNSCR, UNICEF, Teach for All, the Global Students Forum, to just rethink how best we can implement the youth declaration. So these bi-weekly meetings as well informed the forming of the Global Youth Initiative. And then we had, in November to December, we had 7 regional youth consultations, and these were led by the SDG for Youth Network. I'm hoping some of you on this call, the young people, were able to participate in some of these consultations because they were widely publicized on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and all other social media platforms, because we wanted to get diverse voices of young people and capture all their recommendations on what they think needs to be prioritized in transforming education, if I must say. So these recommendations from these regional youth consultations were presented at the high-level steering committee by our leaders. We have youth leaders, that is Kenisha, Aurora, and Doris Mwikali, who are our youth representatives to the high-level steering committee, the body that is responsible for following up on the TESS commitment. So these recommendations and feedback from the 7 regional youth consultations were presented at the high-level steering committee that was held in December from 8th to 9th. So the leaders, as well as the youth that participated, agreed to form the Global Youth Initiative. So we were represented, our voices were represented through our youth leaders, Kenisha, Aurora, and Doris Mwikali. So that is the process that got us to the Global Youth Initiative. And the basis of this, again, I will emphasize, is the youth declaration. So young people out there should be proud of themselves for participating in the youth consultations on the youth declaration for transforming education, because this is the product of all these consultations regionally. Next slide, please. So like I was saying, that the Global Youth Initiative has over 3 pillars, focusing on youth empowerment and leadership. And this is mainly focusing on how do we build capacities of young people and youth to truly transform education in their respective countries and communities. And youth empowerment could look like building capacities of young people in writing, perhaps advocacy, policy briefs, how do they negotiate better, you know? So youth empowerment and leadership is focusing on building capacities of young people, all young people. It needs to emphasize in all their diversities to ensure that they're truly leading SDG4 from the grassroots to the national and international level. And then also the second pillar is on youth engagement and participation. And how are we ensuring that young people are meaningfully engaged? I did mention earlier that besides young people participating in consultations, what next after the consultations? How are young people engaged in decision-making, in the implementation of these beautiful policies that we formulate all the time? So youth engagement and participation is ensuring that also leaders set up mechanisms in their respective countries to ensure that young people are meaningfully participating and engaged in the process of transforming education. And of course, the third pillar is youth-led global education movement. How do we ensure that, for example, young people that are not able to access internet, like myself, who are able to be in this space, how do we ensure that young people at the grassroots in our communities are able as well to, one, understand their right to education, but most importantly, how do we mobilize them? How do we localize this information to be able to engage them further as well in the process of transforming education from the grassroots? So this youth-led global education movement is focusing on students and also young people, but also I need to emphasize that it's also a multi-stakeholder. We want to encourage intergenerational partnerships between youth, students, and, for example, teachers, governments, civil society organizations, to ensure that we have a youth-led global education movement of young people leading SDG4 in their respective countries. Next slide, please. So yes, this clearly explains what I had mentioned earlier, the 3 pillars: youth empowerment and leadership, that is focusing on youth and students having a sound understanding of education policy and practice, but also youth and students are equipped with advocacy skills. And also youth voices of the most marginalized are supported and included. Again, we are focusing on leaving no one behind, and we want to ensure that the most marginalized youth are not left behind. And of course, Pillar 2 on youth engagement and participation is ensuring that political leaders understand the importance of youth engagement in education. And then not only understanding, but actually prioritizing youth voices in decision-making. I think it's one thing to understand, it's another to actually take action. And I think this pillar is focusing on that. And it's also focusing on opportunities at the local, regional, and global levels exist for youth to meaningfully engage with decision makers. These conferences we go at, it's because there's a pillar on that. How do we ensure that there is more youth voices? For example, at the ECW, to discuss education in emergencies. So this pillar is focusing on youth engagement and participation and ensuring that young people are able to access these spaces and have dialogue and conversations on education with decision makers. And then Pillar 3, which is youth-led global education movement, like I said earlier, is also focusing on youth and student groups connect to develop joint agendas and work together towards transforming education. And then also increased understanding of youth engagement in education and opportunities to grow a youth-led global movement. I did mention earlier that we need to redefine what meaningful youth engagement actually looks like, beyond consultation to co-creation and implementation and monitoring and evaluating education policies. So this particular pillar is focusing on that as well. And it's also focusing on youth, students, teachers, and other stakeholders working jointly towards a global education movement. We recognize that youth alone cannot transform education again alone. So we need intergenerational partnerships. We need to collaborate and work together to ensure that education is working for every person. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide as well just reiterates what I was talking about. Pillar 1 is focusing on youth and students, of course, are equipped with advocacy and influencing skills, and youth and students receive capacity building. I did mention this earlier. So we'll be having lots of capacity building trainings to ensure that the youth, when you tell them, for example, to engage decision makers, that they're able to understand how to do that and when to do that. So there will be lots of capacity building sessions to enable youth to ably drive the sustainable change in education that we're talking about. And then I'll not go into details because this is really, everybody can access it. I'll just focus also on Pillar 2 that is talking about political leaders understanding the importance of youth engagement. I did talk about that earlier, but also political leaders are held accountable for including youth in education decision-making. And I think this is very, very key. We've been at conferences where leaders just commit, oh, we'll work with young people, but don't go ahead to do that. So how do we ensure that we hold them accountable to deliver on their premises? And I think this pillar is focusing on that as well. So Pillar 3 is talking about collaboration. I did talk about that earlier, and increased understanding of the state of youth engagement in education and obstacles, opportunities to grow a youth-led global movement. It also recognizes that already there are existing challenges for young people to really participate and lead the change they want to see in education. So how do we address these barriers and strengthen youth engagement at that level? So yeah, those are the 3 pillars. Next slide, please. Okay, this is really, really, really important to note that the Global Youth Initiative was launched on International Education Day in January, and that the SDG4 Youth Network will be coordinating the overall implementation with support from the SDG4 Interagency Secretariat and the UN Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and that the Youth Engagement Group will continue to be active. They'll be meeting monthly, and they'll make reports to the high-level steering committee. So they will be reporting. And then progress made in regards to the implementation of the Global Youth Initiative will be reported at the high-level steering committee meetings in 2023 and 2024. And I already mentioned that we already have youth representatives that are part of the SDG4 Youth Network that really represent our voice at these high-level steering committee meetings. So that will be done. And then the Global Youth Engagement Indicator is in the making. And I think this is really, really core to this initiative. It's ensuring that there's an indicator that countries can report on. For example, in Uganda, we need to ensure that the government of Uganda, for example, is meaningfully engaging youth in all the diversity in transforming education. So Uganda needs to report on meaningful youth engagement annually. And that's one way we are going to hold the governments accountable. How is the government of the US, for example, engaging young people in transforming education? What exactly is it doing? Is it, are they participating in decision-making, in reviewing curriculum? What exactly is the US doing with young people in regards to meaningfully engaging them? So this global indicator is still in the making and will be responsible really to ensure, really, I think it's more responsible for holding governments accountable. We need to ensure that we move beyond commitment to action, and this is one way we will be able to achieve that. So I think that is it. Next slide. I think that is my last slide, but I need to emphasize that every young person is responsible, if that's the right word, responsible of transforming education in your own capacity as an individual, as a collective. You don't have to let your voice be silenced. You can lead SDG4 in your respective community. You can join youth networks. You can join any civil society organization and ensure that your voice is heard somehow, because young people's voices matter and yeah, are central to the process of transforming education. So yeah, thank you so much. And if you want to know more about the Youth Declaration or the Global Youth Initiative, feel free to reach out to the Global Education Cooperation Mechanism or SDG4 Youth Knowledge Hub. Click on those links or reach out to Martha or myself or any other SDG4 Youth Network member. They're well conversant with this information. And yeah, we are leading SDG4 and you should join us. Thank you so much.
That was really terrific, Lynda, and thanks to you and your colleague, Martha, and everybody who's doing this fantastic work. Thanks to colleagues for staying with us. We'll go for just 1 minute because if people have key information to share in terms of announcements as we plan for the Global Action Week for Education, over to our colleague Katie really quickly, and please continue to share ideas in the chat box and also the shared document that she's showing us now. Thanks, Katie.
Great, thanks. Thank you all for these wonderful presentations. So really quick, we mentioned this at the beginning of today's meeting, but from April 24th to April 28th, we'll be celebrating Global Action Week for Education. And this is a different theme every year. It stems out of the Secretariat for the Global Campaign for Education. Here in the US, we have the opportunity to change the dates, but also take initiative on running some different events as a coalition and mobilizing together. So the theme this year is decolonizing education financing. So we can look at that from a range of different levels. We can look at decolonizing education more broadly, but you'll see in this sign-up form that was just sent in the chat and that Annie's sharing now, each day will be a different initiative to mobilize. So it's really open to us and you all and your different campaigns and initiatives to take this and focus on any advocacy work that you're doing on this topic, whether that's in the classroom or whether that's nationally or globally. So we ask that you all sign up. You should have access to editing on this, but if not, you can also email me, and I'm pretty sure my email was sent in the chat, but I can send it again. Or just send in the chat now. So we ask that you fill out this form for each of these days. If there's one that really appeals to you and your organization, you can see on Friday, there's one event that's specific to organizations who have youth programs and youth programming. But also at the bottom there, if these dates don't work for you and you're having some other kind of campaign or advocacy in the months of April, May, or June, please feel free to throw those in there as well. It doesn't really have to be specific to this 1 week. And then lastly, if your organization is based in New York, and you might be interested in hosting an in-person event, we would love to hear about that on Thursday, May 4th, or any other time. So please let us know. This is pretty open to your ideas, and we would love to have some kind of event and organizing with you all. I see a question from Abdul. Can you hear me?
Great, we can hear you faintly. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is, I am Abdul Rahman Case. I'm the Executive Director for West Africa Youth Network for Peace, Education and Economic Development. Education is one of our key thematic areas. We work with the Education for All Sierra Leone. We're also partner of the Education for All Sierra Leone. My take is on the Global Youth Initiative that was presented a while ago. And we would like to know if there are any regional initiatives for promoting education, because some of our activities in line with peace education, within the West Africa region, we work with organizations in Sierra Leone and across the sub-region. We look at issues of peace education, because one of the issues that we highlighted is there are peace education lacking in schools across the region, not only Sierra Leone, but in Nigeria, Ghana, where we coordinate with other organizations. So we want to know what is the collaborative measures being put in place for regional learning as the Global Youth Initiative mentioned by the presenter.
Okay, I'll answer that. My colleague Martha is not on the call. However, the SDG for Youth Network is going to send out a call for other people, other youth to join. However, like I said, the Global Youth Initiative is going to be working with diverse youth networks and student networks as well. So we'll definitely, I think, reach out in that regard when everything is finalized, the process of selecting members to join the SDG for Youth Network, which will be the body that will be implementing and coordinating the implementation of this Global Youth Initiative in terms of collaboration. So I cannot confirm that here now, but we'll definitely work with all youth entities and also student bodies. And like I said, again, feel free to reach out to Martha. I think she's left her email. I'll share it on the chat box, and share it with the GCE team, and then you'll be able to contact her for more details, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynda. And Rachel Kamana, I believe you had emailed. If you would like to unmute or share your announcement in the chat, that would be great. Rachel, can you hear us? It looks like perhaps Rachel's having some technical difficulties. I'm glad to follow up with her and then share her announcement with the rest of the group after this call.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thanks to the wonderful 17 of you who have stayed on a few extra minutes with us. There's so much happening right now. And it's really exciting. We're grateful to all of you for organizing, collaborating, for your joint advocacy. Please let us know. We're happy to connect anytime as we plan for GAWE, the Global Action Week for Education, campaigning around April, May, and June. Thanks to Katie for organizing us. And we really hope that we can continue to share this exciting information. Lynda and Martha, we're so grateful to you for taking the time, and to all of our presenters and facilitators for joining us today. There is a brief poll that should be popping up in your Zoom screen, or might pop up on your web browser when you close. And feel free to also just give us your feedback directly. We really welcome ideas, thoughts for improvements, new topics that you'd like to cover, speakers that you think would be good for future coalition meetings. And we look forward to connecting with all of you very soon. Thanks again for your wonderful partnership, support, and advocacy. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.